Hello everyone, my name is Olivia and today we're going to talk about my favorite books of 2020. This video is going to be a little bit different because I did not find a lot of new favorite books in 2020. 2020 was probably my worst reading year in terms of enjoyment. I did not find a lot of books that really spoke to me or captured my attention or left a lasting impression on me. So while other years I would have 10 books that I really enjoyed that were 5-star reads, new favorite books of mine, these books are just books that I thought were really good, but some of them aren't true favorites of mine. But they are books that I thought were phenomenal and I would highly recommend to you either way. Hello, it's me from the future, and I just wanted to include a little note that I forgot to include in this video when I initially filmed it. And it is, if you know that I enjoyed a specific book in 2020 and it's not included in this video, it's most probably included in my favorite audiobooks of 2020 video and will be linked down below. Those are simply books that I really recommend that you listen to on audiobook because the production value is just chef's kiss, and I think that they would be great books to read specifically on audiobooks. I basically just cheated and wanted to make 2 videos recommending some of my favorite reads of 2020, so I split it up and I just made my favorite books of 2020 and then I made a favorite audiobooks of 2020. So basically it's just because I wanted to recommend more books than normal this year and I decided to split it up into 2 videos. So you have my favorite reads of 2020 and then you also have some of my favorite reads that I specifically highly recommend on audiobook. So I hope that clears up anything in case you notice I didn't include a specific book in this video. It's probably included in that video. Now, back to Olivia. So the first book that I want to talk about is actually my favorite book of 2020. Like I said before, it was very difficult to find books this year that would become favorites of mine forever and ever, and I was losing hope until I read this book in November, towards the end of the year when I barely had any hope in finding a new favorite book of mine. And I read this book and it left such a big impression on me. And it is Hamlet by Maggie O'Farrell. I actually wrote a full written review over on my website, so if you want to read my thoughts there, I will link that review down below. But Hamlet by Maggie O'Farrell was a book that was on my radar because it obviously sounds like Hamlet, so I was like, is this inspired by Shakespeare? And it is. It is a historical fiction inspired by the very sudden passing of William Shakespeare's son, and how a few years later he wrote the play that is so infamous, and it is Hamlet. I'm going to read you the historical note that Maggie O'Farrell put at the beginning of the book because when I opened this book and read these short lines, it completely hooked me and made me fall in love with this story before I even began it. In the 1580s, a couple living on Henley Street, Stratford, had 3 children, Susanna, then Hamnet, and Judith, who were twins. The boy Hamnet died in 1596, aged 11. 4 years or so later, the father wrote a play called Hamlet. As someone who is greatly interested in William Shakespeare, and as someone who finds it fascinating that this man has made such a big impression in the world of art, and yet we don't really know a lot about his life, I was super intrigued by this historical fiction that kind of took the bare bones story of William Shakespeare losing his son and developed it into a historical fiction, kind of speculating what it would be like for William Shakespeare and his wife Anne Hathaway to lose their son at such a young age. What I really enjoy about this novel is that it doesn't really focus on William Shakespeare. It focuses mostly on Anne Hathaway, who is called Agnes in this story because that is a nickname for her. So we get a very close lens onto Agnes's life, how she grew up, how she met William, how she had her children, and the different complexities of her feelings in terms of grief, in terms of marriage, in terms of being a woman during that time. It was such a fascinating read about a woman who married one of the most famous men in the world, yet we don't know a lot about her. And I think that Maggie O'Farrell's exploration into this very infamous family, and creating a fictionalized story centered around such a big part of their life that isn't really documented was fabulous. I greatly enjoyed this novel. I feel like the last chapter was just amazing and so heart-wrenching, and it is such a good book exploring grief, exploring family, and exploring Agnes's life, because we all know about William Shakespeare, but I feel like his wife really took center stage in this novel, and I really enjoyed that. This is such a good novel to read if you enjoy Shakespeare or if you enjoy historical fictions in general. I cannot recommend this enough. This is a story that I still think about, and this is one of the few stories that I read in 2020 where I was just tearing through each page and I could not stop reading, and that was very rare for me to find during this year. Then we have a romance that just swept me off my feet and put a smile onto my face and got me out of a book slump that I was in towards the middle of the year. And it is Take a Hint, Danny Brown by Talia Hibbert. This is the second book in the Brown Sisters series, and this follows Danny Brown as she is working at a university and she is friends with one of the security guards, and his name is Safir, and one day there is a fire alarm going off and she gets stuck in the elevator, and Safir so kindly helps her out of the elevator. He carries her out of the university, and people get that on their cameras and on their phones, and they post it online, and everyone online starts shipping them together. So they decide, why not go ahead and play along into this trending hashtag and fake date to please the masses. So this story is a friends to lovers fake dating type of romance. It is so sweet. It explores so many different serious topics in such a wonderful way. So it's a lighthearted romance while also having some really serious topics spoken about, like grief and anxiety. And I just really enjoyed how Danny and Zafir's relationship blossomed, how they grew closer to each other, and I just loved their personalities because they were both just so sweet to each other and just sweet characters in general. And this is a romance that just put the biggest smile onto my face, and I love it so much. The next book was actually featured in a reading vlog, which I will link down below in case you want to see like all my thoughts about it and my reactions to the book, and it is The Angel's Game by Carlos Ruiz Zafón. This book is a part of the Cemetery of Forgotten Books series, which The Shadow of the Wind is a part of, and we all know that I love The Shadow of the Wind. It's so beautifully written, it is amazing, and this book was amazing as well. This one is more pulp fiction-y and gothic, and it follows a man named David Martin, and he lives in a really cryptic abandoned mansion, and he is trying to write a new book, but he faces a lot of writer's block. One day, a mysterious man approaches him and gives him the deal of a lifetime if he can write a story for him. So of course, David takes the offer, and his life is drastically changed after taking this offer from this very weird man, and thus his whole entire life is changed. In my Goodreads review, I said The Angel's Game is kind of like a tea kettle over a fire. The tea kettle is brewing, the tension is brewing, and soon everything explodes. There were so many twists and turns that this book had, and it kept me on my toes, and I didn't know what was going to happen next. And the way that Carlos Ruiz Zafón just describes a setting and it really creates a unique atmosphere in his novels through his lyrical writing is awe-inspiring. It felt like a movie was playing in my mind, and this book is over 500 pages, and for me that would usually take me like 2 weeks to read, but I think I read this book in 3 days because I was absolutely hooked from the beginning, and I just wanted to know what would happen next, and I just loved the intricate plot line. I loved the writing style. I highlighted this so much because the writing was just awe-inspiring, and if you're looking for a good gothic, mysterious historical fiction, I would highly recommend this one as well as the series. But do keep in mind that it's very violent. There are very dark elements to these stories, and some of the characters are just terrible people. They just really make your eyebrows raise, but that's what makes the story so fun, because not every character is a good person. I had so much fun with The Angel's Game, and I cannot wait to read the last book in the series, because if it's as good as The Angel's Game, then I know it's going to be right up my alley, and I'm so glad I picked this up and I didn't let the page count intimidate me, because I finished it very quickly and I'm proud of myself for that. Then I read a nonfiction on audiobook, and it was such a awe-inspiring and just eye-opening read that I just cannot recommend enough, and I feel like I'm always recommending it to people. And I'm really proud of myself because I really delved into nonfictions this year. I know last year I said I don't really read nonfictions, they don't interest me, but I feel like I didn't find the right topics that would call to me, and now that I know the certain topics that interest me, I'm finding myself reading more nonfictions on audiobook especially. So I read Just Mercy by Bryan Stevenson. This is narrated by Bryan Stevenson himself, but this nonfiction basically chronicles Bryan Stevenson's career and how he became the lawyer that he is today. It discusses him going through law school, it discusses him in his first job, it discusses his career path, and it is just absolutely fascinating with the cases that he had to deal with, the people he had to deal with, and the lives that he changed through his work. So Bryan Stevenson is a lawyer that represents people primarily on death row. So throughout this nonfiction, he discusses different cases that he worked on, and he discusses primarily mass incarceration, providing legal representation to those on death row. He also talks about how children and teenagers are being charged as adults for crimes that they committed as teens. He discusses the horrifying aspects of solitary confinement as well as capital punishment, and the way that he discusses it is so eye-opening. I think Bryan Stevenson is just one of the most inspiring people that I have ever read about, and hearing his story and hearing the stories that he has heard is absolutely amazing. I would also highly recommend the movie that Michael B. Jordan is in. I watched it and I don't think I've ever cried so much while watching a film. And if you're interested in the criminal justice system itself, I feel like this would be a great read. And I would also highly recommend the audiobook because he narrates it himself, and I feel like that adds more passion because it's his story and he's telling it. So highly recommend this nonfiction. Because I was reading a lot of plays this year, that was one of my missions, to read a play a month, and I think I ended up reading 10 plays, so like I didn't hit my goal, but I still was pretty close. And one of the plays that I read was actually a screenplay, and it was the Little Women screenplay by Greta Gerwig. I feel like if you follow me anywhere other than YouTube, you know how much the Little Women movie from 2019 means to me. I've only seen it once, but it's one of those movies that I just cannot stop thinking about, and I feel like the more I think about it, the more I love it, and it just replays in my mind. So I found the Little Women screenplay online. If you were to Google Little Women screenplay, I think Variety has it, and you can download the PDF, and I downloaded the PDF of the screenplay, printed it out at Staples so I can then annotate it, and boy did I highlighted so much of this screenplay. If you too love the Little Women movie, I would highly recommend reading the screenplay because you get to witness the artistry that is Greta Gerwig's mind. The way that she describes the characters and the setting and the atmosphere of each scene in this screenplay adds another layer to the movie, and I feel like it makes you appreciate the movie that much more. And not only that, you get to reread some of your favorite scenes that make you cry. It felt like the movie was running through my mind, and I feel like this is a type of screenplay that I would compare other screenplays to because it is so strong, it is so well written, it is just so full of life, if that's the best way to describe it. I just absolutely loved this screenplay, and it just brought forth so many emotions from me just by reading the lines, and I think that's what makes a screenplay so good. So the Little Women screenplay really left an impact on me, and I just cannot recommend it enough for those who enjoy screenplays or those who are looking to get into screenplays. And yeah, I just can't stop thinking about Little Women, and I have to rewatch the movie because I've only seen it once. I need to watch that again because, I don't know, I love pain. Then I have an audiobook that I picked up on a whim because Librofm offered it, and I decided to listen to it, and I just really enjoyed it, and it is Leave the World Behind by Rumaan Alam. This is a speculative fiction thriller, literary fiction following a family, Amanda and Clay, and their 2 children, and they are staying in a very opulent house in Long Island for a little family vacation, and one night they get a knock on the door. And they're really suspicious by that. So they open up the door and there is Ruth and GH, the owners of the house. They are an older Black couple, and Amanda and Clay and their children are white. So they are immediately suspicious as to why Ruth and GH are out the house when they are renting out the house to Amanda and Clay. So Ruth and GH tell Amanda and Clay that there has been a massive power outage in New York City, and they had to come back to their house that they are renting out because it is the safest place for them to go. Amanda and Clay are immediately suspicious. They think that Ruth and GH are lying, they don't know who they are, they feel very unsafe, and thus begins the story of Leave the World Behind. Leave the World Behind is the type of novel that I would say not a lot of people would enjoy because it is very speculative. It's very murky and very ambiguous. I feel like a lot of people go into those types of novels wanting answers, and this is the type of book that raises a ton of questions but barely answers any of those questions, which sometimes I enjoy. So this novel talks a lot about survival. It talks a lot about the fear that one has when the power goes out and you have no connection to the outside world and you don't really know what's happening. It talks a lot about the internalized racism and prejudices that Amanda and Clay and their children have. What really made me enjoy this novel is that we don't just follow Amanda and Clay's perspective, we follow their children's perspective, and we follow Ruth and GH. It gives us a really in-depth look at this situation from all sides, and I just loved how weird it was and how ambiguous it was. I loved the questions that it raised, and I just loved the overlying tension and fear running through all these characters. If you're a fan of speculative fiction, I feel like if you're a fan of The Dreamers by Karen Thompson Walker, you would enjoy Leave the World Behind. It has the same kind of vibe to it in that this weird situation is happening but in a very remote area, and it only seems to affect this one family because we don't really follow anyone else around them. So if you're a fan of very murky stories, I feel like you would love Leave the World Behind. I don't know, it's just like a book that I think would make a really cool movie, and I just loved the descriptions and the tension from it, and I think it was also great on audiobook because it felt like a radio drama in my head. So if you're a fan of that, Leave the World Behind is the book for you. Then we have a play that I read that I really enjoyed, and it is A Midsummer Night's Dream by William Shakespeare. I don't know how to describe William Shakespeare's plays and their plots without giving it all away, so I'm just going to say that I picked this up in the beginning of the year. I've never read this play before, so I didn't get to study it in high school or college, but I had so much fun with it. It was such a messy type of play where all these characters are getting into shenanigans. They're all just so messy and clumsy in their emotions, in the way that they act, and I thought it was so much fun. It made me laugh out loud, and that's what I really enjoy, being able to laugh out loud to Shakespearean plays. It just pleases me that I understand his humor, because sometimes it goes over my head, but this one really impacted me in terms of the comedy. So I had so much fun with it. I also highlighted a lot because I didn't realize that so many iconic quotes come from this play, and I just had a lot of fun with it, so I wanted to mention this one as well. Next, we have a YA that completely consumed me and just shook me to the core by how much I enjoyed it, and it was Anna K by Jenny Lee. This is a YA retelling of Anna Karenina set in New York City following a group of really rich, really privileged teenagers just getting into the ultimate shenanigans. I just looked at my Goodreads review, and Past Me pitched it perfectly by saying that it's like Crazy Rich Asians meets Anna Karenina, and that is what this novel is. This is actually going to be turned into a TV show, and I am so glad because this is the type of book that would be perfect for TV. It is full of parties, it's full of opulence. There's such a gigantic cast of characters that all have their own storylines that we get to follow. So we get to see the drama unfold and how their lives kind of interconnect and how their relationships and their actions directly influence other characters. Jenny Lee just knows how to write teenagers in such an authentic way. There was a lot of slang in here that I feel like could greatly date itself after a couple of years, but for the time that it was written, it just felt so relatable, and it was just such a fun book that I could not stop reading. I thought it was such a great time. It was just such a fun book while also having some very serious elements to it. And I had no idea what Anna Karenina was about because I had never read it, so this retelling took me by surprise, and I was absolutely shaken by the story and how it ended and like just the different plot points that it hit. I did not know what was going to happen, and I think that's what made it even more fun for me because I was completely taken off guard, and it was just such a fun YA. Then we have a historical fiction that took me by surprise, and it is The Girls in the Picture by Melanie Benjamin. This is a book that I initially started reading physically, and I just could not get into it because I was in a book slump, so I picked it up on audiobook and really enjoyed it. This is set in old Hollywood during the silent movie era, and this follows Mary Pickford and Frances Marion. Frances Marion is one of the most influential women in the early era of Hollywood in terms of writing screenplays, and Mary Pickford is one of the most infamous silent film stars. She is America's sweetheart, and she really makes an impact into the silent film era. So we get to follow these two women as they grow into fame and as they become friends with one another, and we get to see how these two women greatly impact each other's careers. Frances Marion creates the persona America's sweetheart for Mary Pickford, and Mary Pickford is best friends with Frances Marion, and their actions really influence each other's lives. So we get to see the cutthroatness of old Hollywood. We get to see what it's like to be a woman in Hollywood and how they are treated differently from their male counterparts. We get to see Mary Pickford and how she has such a giant weight on her shoulders to be America's sweetheart, even though she's growing up, she's growing older, and she wants to branch out in those roles. And we get to see how Frances Marion is greatly affected by Mary Pickford, who is a very selfish character and sometimes is toxic to Frances Marion. If you're a fan of old Hollywood, I feel like you would greatly enjoy this novel. I really enjoyed this historical fiction. I thought it was super interesting, and I just really loved Frances Marion and Mary Pickford's characters. I thought they were great and really complex, and I just loved seeing like very authentic portrayals of women in history that I previously did not know that much about. Then we have A Dark Academia that I really enjoyed and took me completely by surprise. This Dark Academia is set in the UK, and it follows a woman named Jess who goes to a university primarily because one professor teaches there. She is absolutely fascinated by this one professor, Dr. Lorna Clay, and she just wants to take her classes to learn more about her craft. So there Jess befriends a group of characters who are all very morally gray, and they make some very questionable decisions in this Dark Academia that sets the course of this entire novel. This is a very atmospheric, very slow-moving read that I greatly enjoyed because I really enjoy slow-moving novels if they are done correctly, because this has an overlying tension and mystery to it, and just reading about these characters and the decisions that they make was absolutely amazing because they are so messy, because they make some questionable decisions, and it was just like a soap opera in book form. It was pretentious, it was intriguing, and it was just so full of drama. Just when you think that the drama is over, something else is introduced, and I feel like that's what made it so fun, because sometimes I like reading about characters who make decisions that I would never make, so I can be like, wow, that's certainly a choice to make, and I thought that was so fun. And it was just full of drama. So those are my top 10 favorite reads of 2020. I hope you enjoyed learning about some of my favorite reads of 2020. While I did have a very sucky reading year, these books did really brighten my mood, and while some of them are not absolute favorites of mine, they are books that I would highly recommend and really enjoyed. So if you have not subscribed so already, be sure to do so if you want to see more book recommendations from me, or if you want to see more videos from me in general. general. And be sure to follow me on Instagram as well, because I always post about what I am currently reading on my Instagram stories, so be sure to check that out as well. And I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you all had a good reading year as well. Be sure to put some of your favorite reads down below and pitch them to me so I can learn a little bit more about them, and maybe it'll pique others' interests as well. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll see you in the next year. Bye!